everyone. Welcome to the Founders Foyer with me, Aishwarya. This foyer is full of holiday conversations. The space where creators, founders, and builders can look for all the concepts and support to grow their ideas into products. If there's one phrase that we have heard over and over for about 1,000 times every day in the last 2 years, should definitely be remote hybrid work. From building and iterating on ideas by just pulling the chairs, sitting along with our teammates and talking to each other, to virtually looking at each other's faces on those small files every day. We've done it all. And there's a whole lot of stuff to even think about when you work with folks from different geographies, from different types of interests and passion. So there are many questions that we have in our minds when it comes to remote and hybrid work. And right here, I have someone with me to discuss all things future of work. Marissa Goldberg is a founder of Remote Work Prep, a platform that provides services to help teams set up an effective remote work experience. Marissa has been working remotely since 2015, and she's managed to lead distributed product team members from across 20 plus countries work. So, hey Marissa, how are you? Thanks for being here on the Founders Foyer.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So I can't just wait to get started with all of these concepts that we were just discussing about in the introduction. So let's start with how you embraced remote work, even before it kind of became like like a thing that everybody was talking about. So how is it to believe in a concept like that when it was very, very new for folks working in corporate? And how did you start remote work? Like, could you share your story with us?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, my background is actually in software engineering and product management, and I was working at an in-person software engineering job. It was just an incredibly toxic environment, and I was considering leaving tech altogether. Um, so I just decided to look for a new role and I said I'd give it one more shot. And as I was looking for that role, I just happened to land a fully remote role in 2015. And as soon as I started it, I realized like what the potential was. Like I could move
Mm,
wherever I want, I could work when I wanted. Like there was so much potential there. Plus I had full control over my environment, which from someone who came from, a toxic work experience, that can be a great improvement is being able to control that environment. So I started working remotely in 2015. At the time, there wasn't a lot of resources out there. Like, how do you do this right? It's totally different.
yeah.
So I just started to experiment. I started to try different things. And the remote role I was in, they were not doing everything perfectly. They weren't even close to that. But it was better than in person. So I saw the potential, kept working at it. People started recognizing, like, hey, your teams aren't in meetings all day, and they're really effective. Like, what's going on here? Like, what are you doing differently? So in 2018, I started remote work prep and just started consulting with people because people asked for it. It was just
Mhm.
supposed to be a side thing to show people how they could work better. It was a passion of mine. And then 2020 happened. Everything kind of exploded overnight and we were in the right place at the right time. And I'm now full time on my business. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, what I love about this is it's so progressive, right? Like where it started with, where you felt you were just not able to fit in and it's just too overwhelming and toxic, to moving on to a team where you understand, oh, wait, there is something called remote work. And then like literally going on to do that full time. I think it sounds like a super, connecting the dots approach over here. And it's great that, you were able to convert something that you learned on the job. And as you rightly pointed out, and I absolutely know about this because I have had folks who shared with me about their remote work experiences from 2012, 2013. So at the time that you started, I can for sure relate to the fact that there are no resources. So nobody knows what's the right way to do things. So yeah, I think that's going to make the base of a lot of what we'll discuss today. So yeah, that's like a great context, setting at the start.
Thank you.
Yeah. So since we touched upon pandemic boom because that brought in like a major change. And during and post pandemic, I would say people started to recognize the fact that you can work away from your work desk and literally like it's the way you choose. And there's another angle to this, which is people are using remote work as a best term, whether it's about hiring context or in multiple other working contexts. So now that you've coach so many teams and like work with so many founders. fast forward, what are the parts of remote work you think that people don't get it right even today after like a couple of years of setting in it?
Yeah, yeah, and I don't fault them for this because it honestly took me like a couple years to figure things out as well. It's going from something that you know entirely, like going in the office, you've done that your entire life,
Mhm.
and then you're moving to a different medium and all of a sudden everything's new and you don't know what you don't know. So there's two different things that I mainly see on teams. One is that they're stuck in pandemic remote work, which was everybody went remote overnight. They just attempted to make office work remote and they just tried to mimic everything and honestly it's very limiting because pandemic remote was something that remote workers who had been around for years and years before that just felt stifled. They felt like controlled and like in a box and they couldn't do exactly what they could before. So it's a very different remote work experience from a
Mhm.
traditional remote work experience where you aren't shut down and the whole entire world isn't shut down for a pandemic. So people are still sticking to the same things that they did in 2020 when the world is now way more open. You have more options now, like things can be improved, but they're
Mhm.
still stuck in that one way. The other thing is that they attempt to just mimic office work.
Mhm.
So instead of just trying new things, they are just trying to copy exactly what they did in the office. And that's how you end up in meetings all day and having a
Mhm.
very poor remote work experience where you're overworked, exhausted, burnt out. And it's just an entirely different medium. It's not a good idea to try to replicate what you did in the office
Mhm.
online because they're just totally different.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. Because I think unless you pointed it out now, most of them really thought that when it came to remote work, when it came to staying in touch with teammates, it's, at least the pandemic remote work taught us that, hey, we used to have water cooler conversations, so let's just try to mimic that. We used to do this at the office, so let's just try to bring that in. So I'm a bit curious at this point in time. Uh, when it comes to physical, mimicking the whole physicality and the physical portions that we had at office to remote work, why do you think people really did that? And like, did you have like a bit of a pattern of formation or like a certain psychological thought into it? Like, what were your thoughts about why people did this?
For so long, we've only kind of gained friendships through work, through school. And it's just a lot to get used to in that you don't have to just go through work and school anymore. You can make friends on your own. And so they're trying to cling on to this idea that, oh, I can only make friends through work and I'm not really seeing them in a social setting. So therefore, make more social at work while remote. But really, it's all about like, hey, you don't just have to spend your time around people HR chose for you anymore. Like, you can co work with people at different companies who have, similar interests, or you could, hang out with friends and you can go and like get involved in your community now that you have that time from not commuting and having more flexibility in your work
Mm,
hours. Um, so it's really a matter of people getting used to that, hey, their social circle does not revolve around work anymore. And until
yeah.
that's kind of understood, they're still going to cling on to those elements.
Yeah, that's true in a way. And like you said, there are many networking events or many opportunities to create or foster those moments with folks outside of our immediate circle. So I think also in a way, I remember pandemic really brought that through because I remember people used to have those match me with a friend kind of a platform where they just, like try to meet folks from across different geographies, just try to like have introductory sessions with them. So somewhere definitely the psychological aspect of having a friend or like trying to have somebody to discuss things with guests, it really plays a role back in the work environment as well. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
and
true.
it's relearning how to make friends because when you used to make friends before, it was just like, who's sitting next to me? That's who I'm making friends with.
It was so easy.
it it was easy, but I also feel like they were less close connections because you were just doing it because of convenience rather than
True.
maybe because similar interests, similar values, that kind of thing. So it's relearning how to make friends that can be, much closer relationships than you had before.
Yeah, that's true. No, definitely agree with you because nowadays I think it all starts with first sharing what your perceptions are, what your thoughts are, what your interests are, and I guess somewhere you're like, hey, I seem to see that you also like this. So what about this? And then I think conversation starters are from there. So, just another add-on question to this is, have you suggested any such best practices to teams you work with as a part of remote work prep that you tell them, hey, in terms of culture setting or in terms of fostering these friendships at work or outside of work, don't follow just these traditional methods, but why don't you try some of these? Have you like suggested some techniques like that to them?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think a big thing that people get wrong when they're switching to remote work, at least companies do, is that they put a lot of reliance on social events as culture. But culture isn't just built from social events. In fact, it's like just a tiny percentage of what culture is all about. Culture really comes from like how you work. So even making the decision to work remotely is building culture because you're innately saying that, hey, I trust my employees. I'm giving them this flexibility. I'm giving them this time freedom. And this is how we work. This is how we do things. Culture is really built off of that versus just, like having, coffee breaks and virtual talks and such. So they tend to put a lot of emphasis on those things when it's really about making expectations clear around how you work, and that builds your culture.
Right, right. And sounds more like giving folks the room to share their thoughts and in terms of also setting the way that their work gets valued, right? It's not just about just join this water cooler conversation, but it's more like, hey, we understand you have your boundaries and like there are times that you want to do this. So this is how we value work. So yeah.
Absolutely. And it's also a matter of just like if you think about a company that has a bad remote work culture where they're like in meetings all day, that is setting the culture just by like telling your staff like, hey, you are going to be in calls all day because I don't trust you to do your work in your own time.
Mm,
And also that just that like they don't have the time to do deep work. They don't have that space to actually get real work done because it's always about like meetings and being present and all those kind of things. So just tiny things like that can set
mm,
big changes in your culture.
mm, mm. Yeah, I think also because people think meetings are one way to keep communication forward when it comes to updates or feedback or, whatever it takes to lead the team with respect to the work that they're doing. So at this point in time, I have like a certain, thought in my mind that, how to balance something that is people first, because like we were just saying, you value people, you try to tell them that, hey, this is not the culture we want to set, but at the same time, there are moments where you think the company is being, and let's say if that's going to be having meetings or having a couple of talks, is going to take the forward seat. How do you balance both of these, like the people first approach and company first approach from time to time, especially when startups grow in different stages, right? Because what works at a startup, which is probably a seed stage startup, is very different from as it grows in hiring more folks. So do you have any thoughts on that, like how to go about?
Of course. Yeah. So when it comes to people first, company first, people think of it as kind of like a war between the two. When what I really think is that starting with people first feeds into company first,
Mm,
because at a company level, everything you do relies on your people. Like without your people being happy, healthy, and productive, nothing in your company works. So if you prioritize being people first and allowing them space to, be healthy, be productive, be happy, all these things, then the company first aspect is just automatically taken care of. So my thought process on it is I always prioritize the people first aspect because I
mm.
just think it feeds automatically, and then I don't have to make hard choices and have to go from a company first aspect that takes away from the people first.
Right, right. Yeah, that's fair enough. And have you seen examples of companies that initially struggled to do this, but eventually, like for example, like you notice that a very small gesture like this really made the company a very people first company, and it sort of set an example that's away from a lot of other brands. Like, does any such example come to your mind when you think about this?
So, so when it comes to like responsiveness. So when people first go remote, they think that, oh, I just got a Slack message. I have to respond right away or else my manager's just going to think I'm not working. And then it keeps them in this state where they're constantly interrupted and then they're less productive, even though they're more visible within the company. And I had one company come to me and they had this problem. And they're like, we don't know what to do about it. Like, we want to stay in contact with everybody, but we don't know what's going on. And the first thing I did is set a responsiveness policy. And it basically set the expectation of when you receive a message or receive an email, um, in most cases, a 24 business hour response is just fine. So it doesn't need to be that specific second you get that message, especially if you're in the middle of deep work. We don't want to interrupt that. So setting a responsiveness policy that makes it expectations clear that, you don't have to respond right away. We have emergency contact methods if there is a true emergency. So we're going to just accept that Slack does not need instant responses. And immediately it was like their whole staff kind of like took a breath, like, oh, and they were able to like kickstart things and complete their goals in a more timely manner just because they had permission to not be interrupted constantly.
Yeah, that sounds like an example that most companies would relate to, because it also somewhere boils down to what the teammates themselves think, right? It's more like, even though they know that the team is not putting that pressure on them, it's a very innate thing that comes in them that, hey, oh, I've just got this message. Let me just quickly respond. Or what if I don't respond now? It's more like an immediate workflow that your mind just comes up with within that few seconds. Like, hey, this direction, this direction. So yeah, I think that sounds like a good approach in terms of letting the founders also understand that this is something that the company, as companies need, mandates for, and it puts the people's first approach right into it. So yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, one of the key things about remote work is setting clear expectations. And it sounds so simple, but so many companies do this so poorly in that they think that it's automatic. They think, oh, everybody knows what I know. And so they know they don't have to respond right away, says the manager, but the manager has never made that explicitly clear. And so in the employee's mind, they're like, oh, I have to respond right away. I don't want to ignore my manager. So it becomes this kind of like fear that's driving everything that they do, instead of you could just lay it out, like just say, this is my expectation and this is what I need from you. And then those fears don't get in the way.
Yeah, yeah. And definitely one form of breaking this fear is also methods that can let employees break the barrier with their immediate managers or with their entire team, and try to, not just set boundaries for the main thing, but, like try and talk about what really matters to them, or what is something that they look forward to in terms of giving feedback to the team, because a lot of teams do appreciate it, right? But often it goes missed because people think that they can't share their opinion. So do you usually have some tips around how can employees do that? More like empowered to do that, and of course, a large part of it definitely plays from the company's role. That is, they have to feel so safe and trusted to even open up their thoughts about it. But do you have like other means where some quick, simple ways for folks to think that, hey, the next time I'm going to try this approach?
Yeah, so I don't like to put the pressure on the employees to do this. Like, I believe it's the manager's responsibility. I think the pressure should be on them because they have the power and control in the situation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But one of the things that they can do is create working profiles. And what this working profile basically does is says, like, this is how I work. These are the things that have come up in the past that may have caused some friction or problems, and might happen again. Like, please let me know in this way if this happens. This is how I like to be communicated with. So you just lay everything out. So usually people leave it up to like, oh, I'm working together for months or years, and then I, gradually figure those things out. Instead, just lay it out on paper, like just throw it all in there and make it super clear how you like to work, and then distribute it among your team to both your manager and then also to your colleagues. Because they need this information too. And what happens is you're able to work together in a more cohesive manner just immediately.
I think the next question that I would definitely like you to answer about is, we were discussing about how there's a company first culture and there's people first culture. So when there are new companies, obviously they tend to hire from different geographies. So teammates coming from different cultures and different, literally different geographies to work together on projects. So, how do you think teams can understand the different struggles that come through with working together with very different time zone and very, very different work cultures and natures put together?
Yeah, yeah, this does tend to be a struggle because we're very used to working with our own culture and we see it as the only way to work, when really there's like a broad spectrum. So the very first thing is to understand that you're not going to get it right from the very beginning. Like you are going to get some things wrong. It's just about how you react to getting those things wrong. So whether you are doubling down or whether you're apologizing or trying to understand someone else's point of view, that really makes a difference on whether a team can work with multiple different countries and cultures and so and so. Um, so that's the first thing. The next thing is to recognize the importance in asynchronous communication. So you don't want to just recommend that everybody is online in your time zone. So that might be at 2 a.m. for them, and that's might not be their best working hours. It could be, they could be one of those night owls. But it's really important to leave it up to them on when they work their best hours. So an
Mm.
asynchronous culture is when instead of defaulting to meetings, you default to more asynchronous communications, such as like sending an email or a Slack message or a recorded video. All these things are asynchronous as long as you don't expect an immediate response. So leaning into this level of communication is going to help a lot with working with a global
Mm.
team.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense because you try to understand each other's boundaries. And at the same time, what comes to my mind is there are moments where, as a very clear fact that you don't want to be sending a message just to alarm your colleague who works in a very different time zone. But at the same time, there's the power of serendipity and the spontaneous conversations that most of them try to talk about. And this is something that I think we also touched upon very early in the show when we were talking the fact that people tend to mimic the physicality and people tend to relate to that serendipitous conversations they want to be having with the team. So, what do you think is the right balance here, Marissa? Like, of course, most companies should definitely look at async as a base, but do you think that there needs to be like a certain compensation or a balance with that spontaneity as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the way I describe it to companies who are working with me is that we're going to default to synchronous when it's about speed or it's about relationship building. So
Mm.
speed because, this is really easy. We're all here. We can instantly get a response from each other. We're all on at the same time. So synchronous communication is great for speed. The other thing it's great for is relationship building, because we're just so used to building relationships. We can build relationships asynchronously, but synchronous communications can work better for them. So if it's speed or relationship building, I'd say, go with synchronous
Mm.
activities. If it's not, it's most likely better done via asynchronous communication.
Right. Yeah. And like get your priorities very clear so you know which road to take on at the moment. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
use the right medium. So, like each medium has pros and cons, right? So, I'm not saying synchronous communication or meetings is bad in any way. It is bad for certain types of communication. So, if you're information sharing and there's just one person droning on and on and on in a call, they're not going to get it the right way. They could have gotten that through an email. That's where you see those little memes like this could have been an email.
Yeah.
But if it's for speed or relationship building, they're going to get a lot more from having a call than for like a message on Slack.
Yeah, yeah. That makes total sense because, like you said, there were a lot of memes. There were a lot of talk and noise on social platforms like Twitter, where people just tend to go and start a certain opinion and they used to tag along. People never thought about what really works for them from their team's context, right? It was always about, oh, I read this tweet and you know what? Yeah, this was an email. But then they never thought about the fact that this is something that has to go well with the way that their own team works. So, and it makes total sense, like you said, to sit down and decide the goals. To me, this I think is a very suitable approach for new founders because often I've had a lot of them that I know in my circle who tend to convert what they're working on as from a very side project level to an action company level. And when they look at hiring the first set of folks on the team, I think it's important to understand what really works for you. Often we tend to tear down between is in-person collaboration better, like making them come to office better, or is hybrid work the norm or remote work the norm. So instead of just like looking at another company as the sole reference, I think like you said, do this exercise and try to understand what really motivates you and your company.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, one of the things that comes to this as a very parallel concept to discuss on is burnout, because when you, especially in early stage startups and people who are very, very high agency, who tend to build something together with so much enthusiasm, as much as there is a lot of energy, there is also a case where these high agency folks tend to easily face burnout. And, this is kind of very challenging to recognize in even a physical or a very hybrid setup. So, what kind of an impact do you think this has on a remote setup? Especially, it's going to be super challenging than usual. And how do you consciously course correct this? And how do you basically beat the burnout?
Yeah. So one of the biggest issues that new companies to remote work have is that they default to thinking that underwork is going to be the problem, that they're not going to be able to trust their employees, that they have to do monitoring and like constant calls and things like that to make sure that work gets done. When the real issue is that overwork is going to happen way more often than underwork will. And so by implementing these practices that target underwork, they're actually causing overwork to become an even bigger issue, which ends up causing burnout. Because what happens is that people go remote, they appreciate the freedom, they aren't underworking because they do take pride in their work. And instead, they're overworking to try to make sure that they're always visible, they're always available to answer Slack messages far past the times that they typically would have. So, overwork is always the bigger issue. And there's a lot of things that you can do to fix this. This is not an unfixable problem in terms of having virtual boundaries, in terms of having, set hours, in terms of having like a commute, like a
Mhm.
ritual to start your day and to end the day so that you can turn your brain off at the end of the day and things actually feel done. There's a lot of different things you can do for this. So it is fixable. And I highly recommend checking out my Avoiding Burnout mini course as I go through every single thing you can do to make sure that this isn't a problem for you.
Awesome. I'm going to put that up on the show notes for sure. But yeah, I think that is really a good way to start, because what really comes to me in mind right now is how back then when we used to travel to work, there was always a routine in terms of waking up, trying to set certain rituals, and trying to, like you said, follow a commute route, trying to do an activity during the commute. And that, if I have to think about, is definitely something that folks initially missed when remote work came as a norm with the pandemic. People were really missing the fact that they used to do these activities. And, like you said, it's definitely important to set timings for that. But there's also a lot of friction that comes with this, right? Like often when we're sitting in front of a laptop and we see a Slack message, or when we see our coworker trying to ask us something, it's really difficult to unwind and say, okay, let me come back to this. Like there is time I can take a break and come back to this. So have you advised founders, or have you advised any professionals that reach out to you on those first steps that you can do to occur this? Like how do you avoid the fact that you need to take a break, and like thought that comes to your mind about that friction?
Absolutely. So the first thing is don't have Slack open all day. You shouldn't be seeing those messages at all hours of the day. You should close Slack and actually get some deep work done and then go back to it. So the first thing I recommend is setting synchronous hours. So synchronous hours are when you're going to be checking your email, checking your Slack, when people know that you're available for like instant questions, so you'll respond right away. Those are your synchronous hours. Those should not be your working hours. Your working hours are the total hours you're working for the day. The synchronous hours should be a very small portion of that. That should not be the entire day, because the majority of your day should be spent actually getting work done instead of being in reactive mode. So I usually have like 30 minutes at the beginning of the day and 30 minutes at the end of the day. And those are my synchronous hours. And the rest of the hours, I don't check Slack. And that's what I highly recommend. And then I also have a free Slack hacks guide. So highly recommend checking out that. I believe there's 10 tips in that guide that will help you create some separation so that you're not just in reactive mode all day or hating your life because you're in Slack constantly.
Yeah, yeah. And the synchronous hours definitely seems doable, and it's something that is, as a first step, very actionable, and something that people can get started with. So for sure, yeah, I'm going to like definitely want the listeners to try this the next time they sit at their laptops, which includes me as well. So yeah, I'm
Mhm.
definitely going to try this technique. Uh, So this definitely, I guess, relates to the fact that we can slowly reach burnout, and it's something that can't be done just the next day, and it's going to take time. So one of the things that I want to slightly shift towards in our talk right now is the fact that you've been an entrepreneur yourself, you've been running a company that entirely focuses on training other companies about remote work. So is there like any pattern or frameworks or methodologies that you followed, and is there like any trend and assumptions that you started with which you later fine-tuned the way that it works for you, and something that you want to share with the other founders as well?
I have a number of them because I have been doing this for 4 years now, so
Mhm.
it's been a while. The first thing is taking an async first approach. I highly recommend that. That's something I work with companies on. I also take a people first over company first approach because, like we were talking about before, I believe that people are the core of every single company. They cannot get anything done if their people are not healthy and happy. And so I take that approach to work as well. And then just on a personal level, I do believe in an approach that allows for work to revolve around life. I
Mhm.
think that for a long time, we've had life revolving around work. It's been a situation where we've moved to certain areas we didn't like. We've lived in certain places we didn't like just because it was close to our jobs or close to our industry. And now we have the opportunity through remote work to live where we want. And it changes a whole bunch of things. So, like we were talking about before with commutes, some people miss it in the beginning just because they don't realize they could have that same commute. They could copy the same commute. But the difference here is that with remote work, you now have the option to get rid of all the bad parts of your commute. Like you don't have to do it for maybe 2 hours every single day. You can do it in a way where you're going to your favorite coffee shop instead of just the one on the way. So your ritual is what you make it. And
Mhm.
I think that's a big portion of remote work. And I think that a lot of people still haven't tapped into its full potential.
Yeah, and to me, it sounds like how it directly connects to your personality as well, right? Like you were a different person when before pandemic hit and before remote work was really a thing that you really considered about. And now, I think I've heard a lot of my friends who spoke to me about how they rethought a lot of their priorities, like what really mattered to them, and what was something that was very evident in front of their eyes, was something that they didn't notice so long, and now that they take more cognition about it, and try to take more steps towards achieving it. So, and to me, what you said sounds exactly like that. Like the fact that you can still continue to do the things that matter to you, at the same time, try to reprioritize and see. Is there anything else that you happen to know as like a piece that can fit to the existing setup that you have?
It can entirely change your life and for the better.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So now that we're talking about this, one of the other things that could relate to this fact is um, the culture, right? Not just the company culture or not just the team culture, but when it comes to understanding about how do I make those authentic conversations with my coworkers. Especially when I'm new to a team, I have to start the rapport. Right? It's often very common for people to say, "Oh, our team culture is it's just really open and candid, and then like we give you feedback, like you can just basically talk to anybody on the team." And also the fact that people always talk about, yeah, it's just all in the rapport that you build. But how do you basically build that rapport, and how do you like go along this culture of candidness and authenticity when it's something that's set as a norm, but something that you really fail to recognize on the team? So how do you get started with building the rapport and trying to trust in your coworkers, especially when you're new to the team?
So, trust is something that you have to have with your team from day one when it comes to remote work. So, the first thing that I recommend from company leaders is to build in trust into your hiring process. Instead of someone joining the team and them starting from 0% trust, they should be joining the team and should be starting from 100% trust. You hired them, you made this choice, you should be able to trust them to do the work. So start there. Then, when it comes to culture, another mistake that remote teams make is that they put a lot of weight into social activities and social events and think that's like a majority of where culture is derived from, when in fact it's more about how you work, how things happen day to day, how people communicate, how people respond, how people react when things go wrong. That's what creates your culture. It's not like a pizza party or, a coffee talk on Zoom. Those are not creating your culture. So pay particular attention to your policies around responding. So I went into one company and they had no policy around responding. And so their leadership was like, oh, yes, we're an async first culture. We believe in deep work. However, they had no responsiveness policy. So people were
Mm.
just on Slack all day, just waiting for messages to come in because they didn't want to be seen as a Slack, or like they wouldn't respond right away and their manager would get mad at them. So they were in this reactive culture instead of an async first culture that they declared they were. And it's all because of just simple policy. So if they would have just said, like, hey, we expect a response within 24 hours, then all of a sudden their team can breathe a sigh of relief and then they can actually close Slack and respond in their own time when it works best for them and get the actual real work done. So, how you change culture is how you work.
Yeah. Wow. That example seems very befitting because most often I think we also discussed this when we were initially discussing about the team culture and the company culture. It's the fact that culture doesn't lie just on the social events, but the fact that it has to immediately come with the way you recruit starts with the onboarding and the recruitment, and even the first meeting with the candidate throughout to them working with you and trying to carry that relationship forward. Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely. Awesome. So we are close to the last question of this session, which is more like I would say like picking your brain on the next set of things forward. So there's a work forward approach, right? Where there's a lot of prediction and a lot of assumptions around how work is going to change for good and also for, I don't know, like a lot of bad challenges as well. So if you have to list down 3 points for effectively gearing up towards the future of work, what would those be from your opinion?
So the work forward approach came about because I was going into companies and explaining asynchronous work, and there was instant backlash. They didn't understand what asynchronous was. They thought it was going to make them slower. They thought that it was going to be just harder to work together, and they would just instantly push back on it. And then for the ones who did accept it, they had no idea where to start. They just thought that they should get rid of all their meetings, and that's how you went to asynchronous first culture. So I created the work forward approach, which includes 8 principles on how to switch to an async first team, company, whatever you want to do. And it really breaks down exactly what needs to happen in order for you to make that switch. So highly recommend checking that article on the work forward approach. But three of the principles out of the 8 would be probably start with clarity. So a big thing that companies do, like in my last example where we talked about how they were thinking one thing, but they hadn't actually laid out that vision or provided the policies that would help them go forward with that. Instead, they had no clarity between the two sides. So start with clarity by setting clear expectations. The second would probably be always default to action. So when you're in an async first culture, there's going to be times where your colleague is offline, or and you could sit around doing nothing, just waiting for a response. Or you could have multiple things going at a time. So if one thing is blocked here, you move on to this thing over here so that you're always defaulting to action instead of just sitting around and waiting for things to happen. And the last thing would probably be understand urgent versus important. So a lot of times people get into this reactive mode where they're just checking Slack and email all day and they're just responding. And then when they finish their day, they're like, I didn't actually do anything because they're just in this reactive mode because it was urgent in the moment, but it wasn't important. So understanding the difference between urgent and important, and then designating specific times of the day where, yes, you work on urgent tasks here, but you still get important tasks done here. So making sure to separate it out. There's 5 more principles, but I think those 3 will get you started.
Yeah, definitely. And to me, all of this is definitely tying back to basic behavioral changes that we could start making in order to get to the larger goal, like you mentioned, because most of this tends to go missed out because there's no recognition from our end, and there's no like input that we get from folks across on the team, or especially even our immediate manager. The fact that hey, you are trying to miss on this, or like the fact that there is something that's missing, and you feel like, okay, here's something that I have to be doing to correct it. So that these principles definitely come in handy to not just do from a remote work perspective, but I think it's more like a behavioral change that you can have for good beyond your professional life, like something that you can take more for your personal life as well, because you start to understand what really matters to you, and it's pretty much summarizes who you are as a person and what motivates you.
Absolutely. Yes. So using these principles allows you to have more autonomy with your work, which then allows you to have more freedom over how you live your life. And that's really the ultimate goal.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. Totally agree with you on that. And yeah, thank you so much, Marissa. I think today's conversation has been super good in terms of discovering a lot of things about remote work, and definitely breaking a lot of myths around remote work, because I'm pretty sure a lot of them still don't get the whole essence of it. And it's something that I was glad I chatted with you today, because I've been really looking up to everything that you've been doing with remote work prep. So all the best with that. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing a lot of your nuggets today with the listeners.
Of course. Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome.